This part of the screencast is the first part for March 20th, 21st, and 22nd. We're on the week 3 rotation for our centers, and this is the second time of the week 3 rotation that I met with students. So, the first day that we sat together, we talked about an introduction to pronouns. So, we did a little review when we sat down the next time, and I had students circle any terms that they needed to be studying. So I'm just going to go through those very quickly right now. So on their papers, they should have these words highlighted: pronoun, an antecedent, subject pronoun, and we're looking at these as one idea, subject pronouns, and not just subject by itself, because subject has a different context in what we have been talking about. So, subject pronouns, and these are the subject pronouns that you need to have memorized. And we said that there were two jobs that a subject can do, and that is the subject and the predicate pronoun, which takes the place of a predicate noun. So, all three of these ideas should be highlighted on your notes. Similarly, with the object pronouns, you need to have the object pronoun highlighted. You need to know that term, you need to know that these are the object pronouns and that the jobs the object pronouns can do are the direct object, the indirect object, and the object of the preposition. And hopefully that wasn't too hard to remember because they all have that object word in them and they're object pronouns. The term possessive pronoun, and again, we are not going to spend very much time on possessives other than knowing that they do not need an apostrophe, and they are often confused with contractions. So it seems to be more of a punctuation issue with possessive pronouns than anything else. So for new terms this week, we highlighted reflexive and intensive. And when we talk about reflexive and intensive, we have we have a set of words that can be used both as reflexive and intensive. So we have myself, yourself, himself, herself, and itself as our singulars. And so our reflexive and intensive pronouns are compound words. We said first person, talking about myself, second person is yourself, and then the third person, himself, herself, and itself. And these are all singular pronouns. When we get into the plural forms, the problem with these that I have seen in writing is that they both have to be plural. If our is plural, then self has to be made plural, and it becomes ourselves. There is no such word as ourself. We could be talking about all of you as a class. So yourselves plural versus yourself singular, and themselves plural. And the confusion I've often seen with themselves is that I see people writing their selves, and there is no word their selves. So the reflexive intensive form is themselves. And again, these bottom three, if you're talking about a plural, then the second part of that has to be plural as well. Now, since they're both the same set of pronouns, we had to talk about, well, what's the difference between a reflexive and intensive? Because if I see yourself in a sentence, I have to know how to determine whether it's reflexive or intensive. And so reflexive, our little easy trick to remember is that reflexive is required. The RE and the RE should help us remember that. Reflexive and required. And I tried to think of what's a word or a way that we can remember what they do. And we thought of the little word flex. When you flex your muscles, it's to show how strong you are. And so a reflexive sentence is very necessary in the sentence. It makes the sentence stronger because it refers action back to the subject. So the subject must be really important if we need to refer back to it twice in the same sentence. Intensive, we thought of like the word intense. It's just a really intense movie. It emphasizes your feelings. And so in intensive pronoun emphasizes a same pronoun in a sentence, but it doesn't have to be there. It could be taken out. And so these are the four things that should be highlighted on this part of the notes for reflexive and intensive. And so we look at our example sentences. I went to the store by myself. Our strategy for this is to cross off or ignore the reflexive intensive pronoun and read the sentence as it's written. I went to the store by. Now we can see that when we take that word out, it really doesn't make sense. So when we use this word in this way, it's reflexive because it's required to make the sentence make sense and so that the meaning of the sentence doesn't change. If we did that in this sentence, if we crossed off myself, it would say, I went to the store versus I myself went to the store. And either one means the same thing, and it sounds fine either with or without. So it's intensive. We can take it out. And to give you an example of why or when you might use this term, we said, let's say you had done all the housework at home and your parents came home and you wanted to get some credit for all the work that you had done and your brothers and sisters were trying to take some of that credit from you. You could say, I myself, did all the work around here. And so it's just re-emphasizing the importance of yourself or whatever pronoun it is that you're working on in that sentence and the action that was done. For the next one, Bob gave himself a high five. If we cross out Bob gave a high five after the test when we got rid of himself, it does sound okay, but the meaning of the sentence changes there because the way it's written, it says Bob gave himself a high five, kind of telling himself he did a good job. If we get rid of the himself and said Bob gave a high five, it sounds like he's giving other people a high five, and that's changing the meaning of the sentence. So to keep the meaning the same, it is required in the sentence, and we call it a reflexive pronoun. So, as far as studying, you just need to make sure that you know that reflexive is required and intensive can be taken out. And then the last two pronouns, that we talked about were interrogative and demonstrative. And so we highlighted on our papers the word interrogative, and then you had to write these questions on the blanks. And we highlighted the word question because that's what interrogative pronouns do. They introduce questions. And so we were trying to think of a word that sounds like interrogative, and we were comparing it to some cop shows. If you ever watched CSI Miami, the first thing they do is interrogate a witness. And by interrogating, they're just asking them a bunch of questions. So interrogatives introduce questions. Who are you? Whom were you with last night? What were you doing at 11 o'clock? Which car were you driving? And whose car did you park next to? So they introduce questions, and really there isn't that much of an issue with interrogative pronouns other than the to who and whom. And so we had a strategy that whenever we are unsure of whether to use who in a sentence or whom, we would substitute the word he for who and him for whom. And they fall into this category where who is a subject, can be used as a subject and predicate pronoun, so it's like a subject pronoun like we talked about on the first day, which also do the jobs of a subject and a predicate pronoun. And then whom is an object pronoun because it does the same jobs that object pronouns do. So kind of skipping down here to our sentences that we have who and whom. Practicing our strategy, we put he for who and him for whom, and we read the sentence. Instead of saying whom do the statues honor, we said do the statues honor he or do the statues honor him? And we can tell very clearly that it has to be him, and so him, whom is the correct answer. Now, we will get into a little bit later what job is it doing in a sentence. I don't usually accept because it sounds better or because it sounds right as an answer. But in this case, we just want to kind of get used to the strategy and not spend so much time worrying about that yet. So we're going to do the same thing here. He for who, him for whom, and try reading the sentence. Instead of saying who or whom carved these 15-foot tall statues, he carved the statues or him carved the statues. And we can tell right away that it has to be he, so our answer is whom. So those are interrogative pronouns, and again, what you just need to remember is that interrogatives are questions, and that when we look at he and or who and whom, that we're going to substitute these words in here. And we'll be doing some practice with this in the next screencast that you should be watching. The last pronoun that we talked about today were demonstratives, and we're really not going to spend all that much time on them. These are the demonstrative pronouns: this, that, these, those. We said this and that are singular, these and those are plural. We could also group this and these together because they have to do more with proximity of things, how close they are to you. This and these indicate that they're closer to you. That and those indicate that they're farther away. And so our real issue when we look at demonstratives is just the idea of, is it singular or is it plural? So we always have to find our antecedent. So in this sentence, that is the most amazing picture. We have to figure out, what is that referring to? That picture. And if picture is singular, then we would want to use that as a singular and not those. Those in this sentence refers to questions as the antecedent. Those questions. And so since questions is plural, then those has to be plural. So this screencast gave you an overview of the terms that we reviewed on the second time that we met for week 3, the center rotation. The next screencast is actually going to be practicing using all of these pronouns, diagramming the sentences to see how we did with them. So this is notes, and you need to make sure that you watch the next one and do the worksheet that goes with it if you are absent.